afternoon. This is Scott Vasterling with Growing Craft on behalf of the Highly Capitalized Network. And today I am super excited to have joining us Jocelyn and Claudio from the Budist. Not only are they good friends of ours, but also they are doing some incredible and amazing things on behalf of the cannabis industry here in the state of California. And so thank you both for joining us today on Growing Craft.
Thank you for having us, Scott.
Yes, thank you.
So why don't we start with just a little bit of history? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the origin story of Budist, and also just kind of how did you end up in cannabis? What was your journey like?
Cool. I'll go ahead and start with that. Well, look, in terms of the origin story of Budist, like anything in life, everything that we do is like a culmination of just everything we've kind of done in the past, kind of leading up to this moment, right? And there's a couple kind of key influential kind of drivers that really gave birth to Budist. Of course, cannabis, my personal journey in cannabis, Jocelyn's journey in cannabis that she can share a little bit about was probably the most kind of influential kind of current that led to where we're at. And I'm happy to talk about my particular experience there. But, wine is another key kind of pillar, what propped up Budist. And so just to talk about that a little bit, and also ask, speaking to your question about kind of my background in cannabis, I've been a lifelong cannabis consumer. I started to consume at an early age, like 13 years old, in the early 80s, kind of dating myself. And, was really, I was born in Hollywood and raised in LA and just kind of a kid of that era of sex, drugs, rock and roll. And around that time, I got into, the cannabis culture, which at that point was very music driven. Being in LA at that time is just all about music. And through that journey, I got turned on to the Grateful Dead in 1987 and really jumped into that community and started traveling with the band for several years. And as you well know, cannabis is just a core kind of dimension of that culture and the practices and the rituals of that whole community, and just that combination of kind of music and culture and cannabis, which is very integral to that. And so I did that for a long time. I ended up moving up to the Bay Area to go to UC Berkeley in the early 90s, and I learned to kind of cultivate it at that time. As we know, that's when Prop 215 was really starting to take off. And I was there with a lot of folks that were, actively cultivating and sharing genetics. It was a really exciting time in the Bay Area. That was kind of when the internet was first starting to kind of percolate. So just really, really exciting time to just find myself in the Bay Area. And that's the kind of the combination of technology and cannabis. Upon graduating from Cal, I ended up getting into technology and really into natural products. Sustainability has been a big part of what I've done with my career, really championing organics and other forms of sustainable entrepreneurship and farming practices. And I did a few organic product companies. But fast forward to about 2013, 14, I found myself getting back into the cannabis industry, but now on the legal side. And I just really jumped into every facet of cannabis, really on the plant touching side. I've owned and operated dispensaries, large-scale cultivation facilities, extraction. I did a lot of that under the Guild umbrella. For those that are familiar with kind of Guild Enterprises, I think the brand that's most notable there is Guild Extracts. We're one of the pioneers in hydrocarbon extraction and really brought to market some new and innovative products like THCA and our diamonds, our crystalline. Like we innovated that and developed a lot of really interesting IP around that. So that's kind of my cannabis story. There's a lot more to that, but I've been really steeped in it for almost going on 40 years. And through that journey, really developing a love and appreciation for the plant. And just, I'm so excited to see how it's so, varied now in all the different form factors and categories and ways that we can consume it. But a parallel to that has been kind of my love of wine. I've been a wine connoisseur for most of my adult life, traveled the world of wine. And I mention that because that love of wine and connoisseurship led me to, meeting folks in the wine industry that are wine producers. But more importantly, in the case of the Budist story, I got a chance to meet a gentleman by the name of Antonio Galloni, who's known as one of the world's leading wine critics. And as we know with wine, a big part of that industry is things like critics and competitions and ratings and reviews. We know that from publications like Venice, The Wine Advocate, Wine Spectator, Wine Enthusiast, rating and reviewing wines, and then using that as the springboard to dive into the origin story of producers and going into appellations and regions and terroirs and varietals. There's a really deep well of knowledge and connoisseurship and wine enthusiasm that happens within that universe. And the critic and the connoisseur are really a key piece of that market. And they were instrumental in developing what we see today as this really robust culture of connoisseurship around wine. So through my kind of wine background and meeting folks like Antonio, we started to percolate the idea of building that for cannabis. We saw that cannabis has a strong culture of connoisseurship. We saw that it has a lot of the depth and complexity that you find with wine, with regions and appellations and different varieties and even vintages, we can say. But we saw that there was something really lacking in the industry, that this culture of connoisseurship wasn't being formalized. It wasn't being standardized. It wasn't being professionalized in the way that we've seen with wine. And so that inspiration from the wine industry, coupled with what I experienced firsthand as a brand owner and the challenges that we have with the bottleneck of distribution and getting to retail, how we engage with consumers and how we interact and share our knowledge with consumers. It's really, really tough in our industry, as we know. And there's just a big gap between producer and consumer. There's just a massive knowledge gap there. And so when wine is fulfilled in the ways that gap is filled in the ways that I've described, and Budist really is serving that role in the industry, is to fill that gap between producer and consumer through knowledge and education and connoisseurship. And so we started the industry's first ratings and review platform out of the inspiration that I've kind of mentioned for both cannabis and wine. And that's what kind of brought us here and doing what we're doing with Budist and cannabis.
Well, and how I connected, Claudio and I are both life partners and business partners in building Budist. And it's funny because a big part of our connection really did start with wine as well. I've also, like Claudio, traveled many of the major wine regions of the world. It's a very big passion of mine. It's connected us on many levels. Also, our love of food and coffee. And just as we kind of have matured as human beings, we find ourselves just being more interested in conscious consumers and all of the things that we consume. And so for me and my background and, Claudio and I building this together, I spent before joining the cannabis industry 10 years in the birth of the mobile app space. And so just being a part of that and seeing just how consumption at that point, like what we didn't know at that point in the industry is just kind of overconsumption, and watching all of these apps be built and that whole market develop. A lot of kind of my thought process and what we're building is very much thinking about what this could look like 10 years out once it's really mature. And how do we think about conscious consumption along that way as a market develop? And so after my 10 years in tech, joined the cannabis industry in 2018 and joined as one of the earliest members of Headset, data and analytics company that was just really getting going at that point. And so I helped open up 11 markets over a 3-year period for Headset, where essentially I was traveling the country. I was studying all of the emerging trends that were happening as each state was coming online. So I was meeting the producers firsthand. I was meeting the retailers firsthand. And one of the things that I noticed through the Headset journey for brands is that a lot of retailers were purchasing, based on the majority of the products that were being sold in the market. As we know with other industries, you see a very small percentage of brands that make up a majority of the market. It's the 80-20 rule. And we certainly saw that at Headset. And so when I met Claudio along my journey at Headset, and that's really where we connected, what I was seeing there was that a lot of the brands like Claudio's with Guild Extracts weren't getting the shelf space. They weren't getting the attention. Their story wasn't being effectively told in market. So both of us have really seen this, that for especially small craft brands, equity brands, just really creating a diverse retail shelf hasn't been happening in our industry. And so both of us just taking our past backgrounds, mine coming from tech, also Claudio's tech, the natural products movement, and then our passion for wine and seeing how people appreciate wine, it truly was a culmination of all of our interests and past backgrounds, really leading to building Budist, which, if people aren't familiar, it's, as Claudio said, it's our first dedicated rating and review platform. And we just celebrated our 1-year public debut actually last week. We publicly debuted at Hall of Flowers. And it's just really fun to see, just within a 1-year time period, see what went from a rating and review platform, that started, we assembled this team of 30 critics to really help go launch this. What started as a rating and review platform has really evolved into a movement and a community in a 1-year period. And so there's a lot more there, but that's really the connection and the founding story. It's like, let's celebrate cannabis like we see other people celebrate in other industries, whether that's wine or beer or coffee or movies. We should have the same types of communities and spaces where we can go share our love and our passion for the plant.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, what you've done for the industry and the impact that you've had on really creating awareness around some of these products and cultivators and brands, as I've seen firsthand. I've participated in. And, as you tell your stories, I think back to kind of my historical, getting into cannabis, but also with, you mentioned the Grateful Dead and the wine regions and things. And it's like, I can't help but think that we've been at many of the same shows, probably many of the same wineries, maybe just, and it's fun to that now years and years later. I mean, you and I, we've just really gotten to know each other over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, and to see what you all have done with the Budist just in this last year has been incredible. So I give you all many props for that, and thank you on behalf of the cultivation and brand community for doing what you're doing to help share knowledge. Do you think customers are becoming more educated and more aware about the Budist, but also about products? And is there more loyalty that you might be seeing on the shelves with brands? I mean, are things settling out? I mean, I just be so curious to hear what your thoughts are of where we are right now in the industry and kind of what that means for brand and retail and consumers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, I can speak from a couple different things. So just thinking back on my experience at Headset and studying each legal market, what we know to date is that consumers have been purchasing on price point and potency. And a big part of what we're trying to do is really transcend that. And so the trends that I'm just so happy to kind of, when I think about this and kind of share just over this last year plus, the trends that we're seeing that just make me really hopeful is that we are seeing now the shift to greater product appreciation. We're seeing an integration of these products into their full lifestyle, as well as an interest in wanting to travel to go visit different cannabis regions. More broadly, we're starting to see, just like we saw in wine, at that early foundational stage of consumer appreciation and knowledge, we are just now starting to see that in the Budist platform. So we're seeing the product appreciation. We're seeing what consumers went from looking at a product and, let's say, the bag appeal of that product, or maybe the packaging of that product. Now we're seeing consumers really starting to get into the nuances of the product. So we're seeing them starting to want to explore the flavor and the aromas. We're seeing them want to get into more of conversation around the terpene profiles and the cannabinoid profiles. Those weren't as much of conversations a couple years ago. And I think that's a really, in large part, what we're trying to do is transcend that conversation. So we are starting to get into the nuance so that we can get out of just purchasing on price point and potency. Because if consumers purchase on that, they're just missing all of the depth of these products. So just seeing the reviews, like we can say this, seeing consumers now come into the platform and review products, we're seeing that they are starting to go to those depths. And that's a really positive signal that we're seeing. And again, like just studying kind of the history of some of these other industries and how they developed, like that is the key for us getting to this next stage of growth in our industry. It's all through education. Also, just kind of looking at with lifestyle, it's like a lot of the events, as you know, Scott, that we're doing, it's cannabis and it's incorporating and bringing new consumers in by doing, having cannabis and coffee, right? Like cannabis, there's so many parallels to explore between these plants. Same thing with wine and with beer and with culinary experiences. In large part, we're seeing consumers integrate cannabis into their lifestyle with other things that they're doing. And it's not just cannabis on its own consuming.
You're absolutely, the experience of cannabis and also the motivations and inspirations that artists, musicians, athletes, I mean, it really is an experience. And I think that you're doing an incredible job of helping share that experience through the platform and the way in which you're getting the information and education out there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's great. And you mentioned the coffee, and I know you have an event coming up. Maybe tell us a little bit about some of the events that you guys have coming up. I know you also were heavily involved with the State Fair, the first on-site sales and consumption event in Sacramento. We saw you there, and that's happening again this year. But maybe tell us a little bit about some of the events you guys have coming up and how people can find you and participate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm happy to maybe speak to a little bit of that. So yeah, as mentioned, just this Sunday at the Woods where, they're opening up their new coffee shop, Cafe Woods. And we see that as a great opportunity, for, thinking back of the old days, even though this is still happening of going to Amsterdam, right? Like the Mecca as it was for us, stoners at the time of making our way out to Amsterdam and enjoying that cafe experience of just coffee with cannabis. It's something that we've been doing a long time. But, in our current cannabis culture, again, cannabis has been really relegated to just kind of the lifestyle niche by and large. This is an oversimplification, but still, people haven't really explored the dimensions of, as Jocelyn was speaking to, of how you get coffee and cannabis or food and cannabis and integrate it into other lifestyle practices and traditions and customs that we do. So a lot of our events that we host and we develop, a lot of them are collaborative. Some of them are all just 100% Buddhist, but they're ones that are exploring these different dimensions. So we have this coffee event coming up. We have another event coming up at the Woods again on May 1st, which is like Hash Nouveau, where we're going to be getting concentrate or a hash and pairing that with a farm and looking at the same cultivar that was produced by the farmer and extracted by the hash maker, and then really looking at that cultivar in its journey, really from soil to oil, and really being able to see how that cultivar expresses itself originally in the raw flower, as well as in the concentrate and what's preserved in that journey, how the aromatic or flavor profile might change. So that's just another example of an event we're doing. We're profiling 6 different farms and 6 different hash makers and going through that comparative kind of tasting. And that again kind of speaks to some of the, I think the ethos of the events that we're really and how we're approaching these events. Everything is designed for product appreciation, as we've been discussing, and really encouraging the consumer, the connoisseur to do a deeper dive into these products. And that's the thing, as we know, there's a lot of people that just kind of consume cannabis and it's just part of just what they're doing in their day. They wake up, they take they rip a bong hit and they move on with their day. And at least, and again, there's a generalization, but there's not a lot of thoughtfulness oftentimes, right? And so for us, it's kind of slowing down and saying, look, this is something that's integral to our life. It's more than just this product we consume. It's something that's, steeped in our culture. So let's just take a moment in our busy lives to stop and really think about what it is that we're consuming and really tease out all the different nuances that can be found there, from flavor, aroma to exploring different effect profiles. But then again, like wine, you can dive into the producer, right? Folks like yourself, like what is your story? Like what is the origin story of the farm? Is it multi-generational? Where is it from? Let's go up to Humboldt. Let's look at the appellations and the regions and the sub-appellations. Let's understand what the terroir is and what effect that has on the aroma and the flavor profile. Let's start to think about things like maybe vintages. Can you age cannabis? Just all these things are the types of conversations that we're really developing. And it's not that Budist is innovating in anything in terms of like these things have always existed, right? We've always had connoisseurship. People have thought about these things and they've been part of our culture, but they've been kind of here and there, right? They've never really been institutionalized or formalized or standardized or really brought to the fore in the way that I think we're uniquely doing. And we're not the only ones. There's other folks in the community that are working with us or separate from us and trying to advance and elevate the conversation. And that again is a lot of what we're doing with our events. You mentioned the California State Fair. That's another example, and that's nothing new in terms of having competitions. I think what's novel about the State Fair is that this is a state-run kind of fair, the State Fair, right? But what's kind of historical and remarkable about it is that this event's been going on since the 1800s, right? And the venue is one that celebrates the great agricultural tradition of California, among other things. There's livestock and things like that. But on the agricultural side, we're looking at things like olive oil and cheese and beer and wine. And for those that haven't been to the State Fair, there's a bunch of different halls where you can go to the wine hall and learn about not just these great wines, and there's a wine competition, but you go into the agriculture and you go into the heritage and you really understand what the farming practices are there. So it's incredible that this, even though it's on the state level, it has global recognition, this this global stage to be able to recognize. And we all know that California, we're like the driver of agriculture for the rest of the country, and our products make their way around the world. California is just known as the heart of agriculture in many ways, and for the like this, for the domestic slow food movement with folks like Alice Waters. So anyway, the state fair is something that celebrates all of this. So to see cannabis sharing that stage alongside these other great agricultural products, that's what's significant about this. And Budist's role in this is that we're helping to lead the competition. We're bringing our team of 30 plus critics who are judges in this case to assess California products across all the major categories. Last year, we had 500 plus entries, and just super exciting to see the best of California shine on this stage. So anyway, that's just, you asked about events. That's another kind of great event that we're excited to be behind.
Basically, the through line with everything that we're doing, it's really, as we're saying, it's about product appreciation. And it's really simple. It's like the people, the places, and the producers that define, and the products that define our heritage here in California. That's what we really want to celebrate, and everything. That's the through line with our events, is really creating engaging experiences to highlight the producers and the products themselves. And I'll just say, from one of the reasons that I think it hits so personally for both Claudio and I, but for me especially, is I've been consuming cannabis for 15 years, pretty much daily. I'm a flower consumer. And, it really wasn't until kind of, as we're saying, like slowing down and being thoughtful, for me, going through the Gangier program several years ago really helped me do that, because it was awakening all of my senses. And I started to have the vocabulary and the language to really describe what I'm experiencing through all of my senses. And it's just interesting for me thinking about it, in that, here I had been consuming cannabis daily for so many years of my life, but really it wasn't until several years ago that I had the language to describe what I was experiencing. And then here I am meeting all of these other passionate people that we're able to then actually communicate and use this language that we're learning. And that we're really at that foundational level of that, like in our industry, like that is just kind of now happening for so many of us. And so that's the through line and kind of the ethos of the events that we're creating, is let's stop and really slow down and appreciate and talk about and put language to all of the things that we're experiencing, so that we can then grow this for the greater industry and community. And again, like tying that to wine, like that's how it happened in wine. Think about like 1980, your average consumer had no idea the difference between a Cab and a Pinot. How did they know the difference between that? Well, it was the critic. It was Robert Parker starting the Wine Advocate, using the 100-point system that then created a common language for other people to go discuss. And then what happened from there? Then you start to see this whole world develop, where then all these other publications, you've got Wine Spectator, et cetera, et cetera. You've got the sommelier program being born. And the next thing you know, you have this really robust market like you see today, where this is people's whole worlds now in the wine industry. It's their whole life, and getting into the nuance, and they're going down the rabbit hole of appellation and terroir and all of those things. But it takes the language, it takes the community, it takes that universal understanding. And for us in the cannabis industry, it's like we're in 1980. We're really in the early beginnings of that. And that's why we're just so passionate about creating experiences that kind of tie all of that together and really excite and educate the consumer, and just support all of the brands and help give you all something to kind of go out into the market and talk about, and a story to tell.
And you're also creating a way that is normalizing cannabis in a way that maybe people haven't thought of before, where they're connecting it to the culinary arts and, like you said, to wine. And they're like, oh, there are so many similarities in appellation of wine regions and appellations in cannabis regions. And so I think the platform to give the ability for brands to be able to tell their stories, there's not really another place that I found like it, that I can go and learn all about who's behind the brand, the strain, why they're growing and doing what they're doing. And I think as a consumer also, I love hearing those stories. Not everybody cares, we mentioned that, but the people that do care really care. I think I have personally seen the impact that you all are having on the industry. And I'm incredibly impressed with the amount of energy and time that you're putting into making this such a successful platform. And so I thank you for that. But so Budist.com, and then also the app, right? Maybe tell people, make sure that people can find you and join the app and see exactly what it is that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, truly, it's like I always tell everyone, like, please go check out the app because there's honestly nothing like it. Like just the design of it is so incredibly beautiful. Anyone can come on and create their own profile. They can review products. It's kind of like Rotten Tomatoes, right? We've got the critic, we've got the consumer. We're aggregating the scores and trying to make this a really helpful, trusted tool that consumers can use to kind of guide their purchasing decisions. But yeah, just I think people will see it's just really elevating our industry. And so we're just really proud of the entire experience of the app, the design of it. So it's available on Apple and Google. Like you can download it and check that out. And then on our Budist Instagram account, Budist_official, you can see all of the events that we're doing. You can see, we're highlighting a lot of the producers. We're creating a lot of educational content. You can see kind of what these community events are like. And we invite everyone to come join us. If you're someone that just is an appreciator of life, and whether that's cannabis or even just some of these other experiences, just come and partake in this and be a part of it, because it's a just really kind, warm community of people that we have that are a part of this. And we are truly like opening our doors and our hearts to everyone to just kind of shift their own perspective of the plant. And I hope that you will see that through everything that we create at Budist, whether that's the app or our website, whether it's what happens at an event. It's just a really thoughtful community of really great people. And we just invite you to come join us.
Well, thank you both so much for joining today, kind of sharing a little bit of your story. I look forward to seeing you at all of the future events, including the State Fair and many others. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. This is Scott Vasterling, Growing Craft. Thank you to Jocelyn and Claudio for joining me today from the Budist on behalf of Highly Capitalized. So have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.